Hi, friends. Welcome back to Balance Black Girl. It is Les here, and I appreciate you tuning in today. So, all month long, it has been Mindset May. We've had some really fun conversations on the podcast, all about improving our mindset, focusing on our brain health, balancing creativity and focus, rewiring our brains. And I wanted to finish up the series talking a little bit more about my mindset journey and how the changes that I've made in my mindset have reflected in some pretty real and impactful changes in my life. And I don't usually share a ton of personal episodes here on the podcast. I realize that after almost 5 years of having this show, someone could have listened for the whole 5 years and still not really know me and know who I am. I think the 25 by 25 episode that I did about a month ago probably provided a little bit more insight into my background and who I am. And I'm trying to find the right balance, no pun intended, of sharing more of my story, also featuring our amazing guests, but also keeping some things private and to myself, and also information of loved ones and other people who have been a part of my lived experiences, not necessarily putting all their business out there. So it's been kind of a dance to figure out how I can bring a little bit more of myself to the show while also still maintaining the integrity of featuring our amazing guests and maintaining a sense of privacy. So I'm still working with that dance and I'm still figuring it out. But today's episode is going to be a little bit more of a personal one. So, first, I want to talk a bit more about my mindset journey and just how my mindset and my habits around mindset have really changed over time. For a good chunk of my life, probably from about the ages of like 9 until 23, I was a very fearful person. I was afraid of everything. I was afraid of failure. I was afraid of being seen. I was afraid of being heard. I was afraid of getting in trouble. I was afraid of being perceived as bad. I was afraid of being liked. I was afraid of not being liked. You name it, I was afraid of it. If I were a rugrat, as much as I wish and like to think that I would be Susie, I know for a fact that I would be a Chucky because I was just afraid of every single little thing. And that really dictated my behaviors and how I moved about the world for quite some time. And I was reflecting, trying to think, okay, where did this come from? Or when did I first start adopting those behaviors? And the first memory that comes to mind was when I was probably about 9 or 10 years old. I'd been playing soccer for most of my childhood. All throughout elementary school, I'd been playing on the same soccer team with the same girls. And in our fifth grade year, as the team disbanded and we got ready to go to middle school, we had the opportunity to either try out for a select team, which was like a competitive team that we had to try out and be chosen for, or, not play or decide to play at school or whatever it was that we wanted to do. So after our soccer season ended, I opted to not try out for that team because I was absolutely terrified of the idea of trying out for that team and not making it. The idea of not making this team was so scary to me that I ended up just giving up soccer altogether. And looking back on it, I don't fully understand where that fear came from or why that fear had such a power over me because soccer was something that I really enjoyed. And now looking back on it, I think, well, if I really wanted to make the team, I could have practiced and put a little bit of extra effort in and worked on my drills and prepared. And I really wish that I would have still tried because if I would have maybe put in that work and put in that practice and made that team, it could have been a really great lesson in working towards something that you want. And even if I would have tried out and I would have not made the team, it still would have been a really great lesson. And sometimes you don't get what you want and you still survive. Like either way, it would have been a win-win. And I'm really sad that my younger self just didn't fully understand that and kind of robbed myself of that learned experience that if I would have gone through with it and learned either lesson, it probably would have helped me a lot more in the long run. And a lot of the really hard lessons that I had to learn after that, I probably would not have had such a hard time with. But that was the choice that I made. That was what happened. But I do think that experience really planted a seed that started dictating my behavior for a really long time after that. So moving past that point, going into high school and my teen years, and even after high school and into college, a lot of my decisions and actions and how I acted and communicated and moved through the world were very much rooted in fear. I had debilitating imposter syndrome about literally everything, even school, academics, anytime that I was going into something different. So that move from middle school to high school or from high school to college, just terrible imposter syndrome, which doesn't fully make sense because I was a solid student and was relatively well adjusted. Like there was no one thing or event that was earth rocking, but I just had such a hard time anytime I came up with a situation that could have resulted in failure. It just, this fear just took a hold of me. So it absolutely impacted school, impacted my social life and my friendships. It impacted dating, which when I was in high school just didn't happen at all because I was so afraid, which was its own set of trauma. And then when I got to college and I did date and I ended up in horrible relationships because I was just taking what I could get, that resulted in a different kind of trauma. And it just started feeding my desire to be small, my desire to like clothe myself in that fear and kind of close myself off from possibility, close myself off from trying. And probably the biggest way that that impacted me was in my career. As I was moving through college specifically, I had this really, really strong anxiety around what I was going to do after school. College was a really rough time. I've talked about it in a few other episodes of the podcast, but for me, socially and financially, it was really, really rough. And I had a lot of survivor's guilt because I was off at school doing my own thing, couldn't really afford to be in school every semester. It was like, will I or won't I get kicked out because we didn't pay? And there's all these issues with this. I had a lot going on back home where my family was having a really hard time. And I had a lot of survivor's guilt that I wasn't there and that I was having this experience that was costing all of this money. So it ended up resulting in me having some really, really severe anxiety as I was going through school, feeling really stressed about what is my career going to be? What am I going to do after school? And I remember being a sophomore in college and I was literally having severe debilitating panic attacks, stressing out about what I was going to do for work after I finished school. And I ended up changing my major and going down this whole different career path of what I thought would be a guaranteed job, which was entirely different than what I had set out to do and what I wanted to be when I grew up, because I felt this fear and this responsibility to start making money and to start making money immediately and having all of those answers. And again, that's just an example of my behavior being so dictated by what my fears were, that my interests, my desires, what I wanted totally went by the wayside because my fear just ruled everything. And I had such a fear-based mindset. So once I approached my early 20s, this started to slowly change and shift. That fear-based mindset got me started in a career that was not bad by any means, but it just was not for me. It wasn't a good fit for me. It wasn't aligned with my interests. It wasn't the type of work that I wanted to do. I ended up staying really local, staying really close to home because I felt a lot of responsibility to stay close to home and was still financially helping my family and had a low entry level salary and had all of these loans and all of these things. And I've had this really small, contained experience in my early 20s. And I realized, okay, the way that I'm thinking and the way that I'm moving and the way that I'm acting, it's gotten me here to this small container. And I don't like this. And what are some things that I can do to start slowly dismantling it? And that's what led me to having an entirely different experience around mindset that started in my 20s. And it was a really slow process. Slow, like my mindset slowly started changing, and it took a while longer for my behaviors to then change after. But it steadily started happening. And it started happening around the time that I was about 23. In my 25 by 25 episode, I talk more about that, and I talk more about that year in my life and the specific things that I did. But some of the things that really impacted my mindset and that really helped me expand, one, were consistent movement. So that was around the time that I got really interested in wellness, that I got interested in fitness, started working out more, started challenging my body more. And by challenging my body, that started to challenge my mind. I became a lot stronger physically, and that in turn turned into me becoming stronger mentally in ways that I never thought were possible. Like, I'm the girl who quit the soccer team because I was afraid of running during tryouts. So the idea of me, 10, 15 years later, like lifting all of this weight and doing all of these things is wild and a total 180. And once I learned what I was capable of physically, I started thinking, okay, well, if I can do that physically, what am I capable of mentally? And it started just opening up an entirely different like mental experience for me. And then also during that time, I really started shifting the types of content that I was listening to because while I was surrounded by really wonderful, really well intentioned people, I think being in that same environment my entire life, I was also around a lot of people who were used to not only me being small, but they were also small. And they also had kind of a limited worldview of what was possible and what was comfortable. And a lot of the ways that I was acting was kind of in line with a lot of the ways that the people around me were acting. And so when I started seeking out just different types of content, I started listening to podcasts and reading self development books during that time. And this was back when not a lot of people were doing it. It felt like maybe 2014, 2015. And I started seeing that there were people who thought in different ways and who had maybe come from similar backgrounds as me, but were able to do different things and expand a little bit more outside of that bubble. It started really showing me what was possible. And those things really started changing my brain. That was when I started meditating. That was when I started journaling. That was when I started really studying the self and studying habits. And it was really, really slow and it was really gradual. But my brain and my mind began to change a lot. I slowly began to believe that more things were possible, and not just possible for myself, but just possible in general. I became slowly less and less afraid of taking risks and doing different things and putting myself out there in different ways. And when I was in my early to mid 20s, I actually worked in aerospace finance, which is about as thrilling as it sounds. And I worked in an office that was maybe 3 blocks away from my high school. And the highlight of my day would be like sneaking out of work and going to Target on my lunch break. That was what my life was. And there's nothing wrong with that. None of those things are inherently bad. However, before I was in that position, I had once dreamed of living in bigger cities. I wanted to live in LA. I wanted to spend time in New York. I really wanted to be a journalist and I wanted to work in media and be my own little version of Oprah. And knowing that that's what my aspirations were, working in aerospace finance in a windowless office 3 blocks from my high school with the highlight of my day being a trip to Target was not exactly the intention that I had set for myself. It wasn't what my soul was saying. Hey, this is what I'm interested in. This is what I'm excited to do. I wanted to travel. I remember in college, I so badly wanted to study abroad, but I could barely afford to be in college to begin with. So affording to study abroad just was not a thing. I wanted to travel. I wanted to have these experiences. And I'd convinced myself that those things just weren't possible for me. And so when I finally got to the point where the discomfort of staying the same or the pain of staying the same became greater than the fear that I had of just trying and trying to do things differently, that was slowly when my actions were able to start catching up with the mindset changes. And that was particularly, no, that's not how do I say that. And that was a really scary process because sometimes when we are keeping ourselves small or when we are acting out of fear, it's because we're trying to keep ourselves safe. That's what I was trying to do when I was in college, when I was fresh out of college. I did not feel safe anywhere. I did not feel safe at school. I did not feel safe at work. I did not feel safe at home. So clinging to what I thought was a safe choice to do with my life or with my career was creating a sense of safety that I just didn't have anywhere else in my life. But that's a false sense of safety. Because if you're doing things that are out of alignment for you, no matter how safe it seems, there is no safety in being out of alignment because you're not going to have safety within yourself. And that's the safety that matters the most. So now I know that those things that I had wanted, whether it would have been to study abroad or to travel more or to work in media or to move, away from my hometown after college, now I know that those things are possible. They probably would have been pretty hard to try and do at that time. But now being a little bit older, having a more expanded mindset, I can think of solutions and I can think of ways to make things move and to make things work. But back then I just wasn't there yet. I was very linear, A to B to C to D. And if I did not see a clear linear path of how to do something, it seemed like it was impossible. I have a lot of regrets from my 20s, and those regrets really stem from how small I was really forcing myself to play. I regret not trying and applying to go to my dream school. I regret not going for jobs that I actually wanted. I regret not sticking with the major that I actually wanted to study, even if the job prospects looked a little bit different than what I ended up studying. I regret staying in my hometown as long as I did when I knew in my heart that I could flourish in other environments. I regret staying in relationships that just were not worth my time or putting too much time into relationships that were meant to be for a short season. And it was a really slow, painful process to unlearn all of that. Frankly, I refuse to believe that our 20s are the only decade or the only time in our lives where we can make those things happen for ourselves if that's what we want. But I'll get to more of that in a bit. So, like I said, my 25 by 25 episode talks about more of the specifics of what I was doing during that time in my life to learn how to expand and be a little bit less fearful and try new things. So, if you haven't listened to that episode, I'll link it in the show notes so that you can check it out because it gets a little bit more tactical into the different things that I did to create change in my life during that time. Really, that time was when I learned how to try. And that was the period in my life where I learned how to not be so afraid of failure. Like that sense of failure that had me in a chokehold since I was 9, that was the time period where I really learned how to let go of it. So after a few years where I had leaned into the fitness, like I mentioned, I leaned into the personal development, I started believing that things were maybe possible and that I had more options than I thought I did. I slowly became more open to making different decisions. And by the time I was in my late 20s, like all hell broke loose. I went buck wild making making bad decisions. I made it all the time that I didn't make bad decisions. I made up for from the ages of like 27 to 30 because I was doing the most. I was making all kind of risks and I was failing left and right. I had career fails, financial fails, relationship fails. I mean, it was a little bit of a mess. And I don't judge myself for that time period because I was allowing myself to stumble and to learn and to make the mistakes that I probably should have been able to make when I was younger and just didn't feel safe enough to. I just lumped them all together during that time period. But if you listen to the episode that I recently did on confidence, where it talks about confidence being a willingness to try, that was the first time in my life where I truly felt like I started building real confidence. And a lot of this really came to a head by the time I was 29. If you're in your mid to late 20s and you're approaching 29 to 30, please do not be afraid of that time. If you're approaching your Saturn return, please don't be afraid of that time. It's actually a really, really beautiful time. And when I think back to the year that I was 29, that was actually one of the best years of my life so far, because I'm sure that there are other amazing things in store. And so that's not going to be the pinnacle, but so far it's been a highlight because that was when my actions really started catching up with my mindset. I had a few years of like failing and trying different stuff and doing things that didn't work and being reckless and making not the best decisions. Thankfully, none of them were permanent or resulted in permanent, consequences, because that's a different thing. That's what we want to avoid. Make mistakes, but don't make permanent mistakes would be my advice, especially to younger people. But that was when my actions finally started catching up with my mindset. So I'd started doing more of the mindset work and more of the expanding when I was about 23, 24. And then by the time I was 29, that was finally when my actions started catching up. And it was really such a beautiful time. That was when I started this podcast. I started putting myself out there more, and I've made some incredible friends who I'm still so close to and who have been so meaningful and changed my life and just been huge expanders in so many ways. That was the year that I finally left my hometown. I'm finally not wandering around the Target down the street anymore. Nothing, not that there's anything wrong with Target or with that Target, because I still go there sometimes, but that wasn't like the highlight of my life anymore because I was able to see some other things and to start traveling and to start having the experiences that I really, really wanted to have. So once I got through that season where my actions started matching up with my mindset a little bit more, and I feel like my mind had really started expanding and I really started feeling like a grown up who didn't feel so weighed down, but I felt optimistic and felt like there was hope and like I had a sense of wonder and like I could co create and co design this life that I'm given. My brain started really shifting, like really shifting. And I think when you get around 30, sometimes we can reach this mode of panic. And for some people, that makes them want to be like, if I haven't already, I need to nest right now. I need a house and a partner and babies right now. Or maybe you get to 30 and you're like, okay, I got to get this career together right now. And for me, because I had felt so adultified earlier in my adulthood experience, like I was a young adult when I was, 20, 21, but I had these responsibilities and I felt this pressure that was a bit ahead of where I was cognitively. When I was 30, I was like, I'm good. I've I've paid mortgage. It wasn't even mine, but I've done that. I have no desire, am in no rush. My brain was like, I want experiences. I want to do those things that I've been wanting to do this whole time that I was actually too afraid to do. I want to do all the things that I've convinced you couldn't do. Now is the time that we're going to do them. My brain was like, I want creativity. I want new experiences. I want fun. I want flexibility. And that has kind of been the mode that I've been in ever since. And I will say that even though I now at 33 am a lot more open and would say that I have generally a healthier mindset than I did at 23 and am willing to try new things and move differently, I'm still absolutely a work in progress. I have not gotten all of this figured out and I'm still learning lessons all the time that help me continue to expand my mind and continue to expand my mindset. An example, and this is going to sound like a bit of a trivial or kind of vain example, but the first one that comes to mind would be around like beauty routines, because in my 20s, I had convinced myself that I was low maintenance. I was like, I don't need to get my hair done. I don't need to get this done. I don't need to get that done. I don't need makeup and this and that and the other. And there's nothing wrong with that if I would have genuinely been disinterested in those things. My thing was like, I really was interested in those things. I was just broke. And that's what I was telling myself to make myself feel better about not having them. And I had to learn how to give myself permission to like the things that I like and to want the things that I want, even if I don't necessarily have a way to get them now, or if it feels like it's not possible for me to have them right now. It's still okay to want what you want, and you don't have to convince yourself to not want the things that you want. Like, be open to it. And now I feel really fortunate where I'm in a little bit of a different position. I'm still very much a working class woman, but I'm like, maybe I can get a silk press every once in a while. I can go to Sephora and get a few things. And just that expansion of like, actually, it wasn't impossible. I just needed to move some things around and to make some other things work is like a really important mindset shift that we can make. And that can apply to a lot of other things. Like I said, I haven't figured everything out. And a big area that I think I'm still really growing in and leaning into shifting my mindset around is relationships. Y'all may have noticed that on this podcast, I don't really be talking about relationships much at all. except for like the really general episodes where we bring in like an expert or a therapist, I don't talk about my relationships, specifically romantic relationships whatsoever. And it's not because I'm just this super svelte private person. It's because there ain't shit to talk about. Nothing happening, no activity, quiet on the home front. Like there's literally nothing to say because there's nothing has been happening in that area. And that hasn't always been the case. I had some longer term relationships through most of my 20s. My last one ended in 2018. And I spent about a year after that one ended just fully doing my own thing. Like that was kind of at the height of me making really bad professional and financial decisions. And I had no money and it was just a rough time. And so I spent that time predominantly from 2018 to 2019 kind of getting myself together and focusing on myself, getting my career back on track, making new friends and traveling a little bit more and doing a little bit more. So that first year of my single season, that was really what I was focusing on. And then once I got to that point, I was like, okay, I'm ready to date again and I can do the things. And I've done all of the things. I have been on every app and every date, and I've said Sierra's prayer and everybody else's prayer. I've made 97 lists, 10 ways to Sunday about what qualities I want my partner to have. And, 4+ years later, it just still hasn't happened yet. And I reached this point where I was like, okay, I'm going to fully detach from this. And maybe that's just not for me. Like maybe I just don't even want those things. I don't want a partner. I don't want to have kids. I don't want this. I don't want that. And I had to realize that I was with that thought doing the exact same thing that my younger self was doing about like the hair and the clothes and the makeup, telling myself that I didn't like it or that it was unappealing just because I felt like it wasn't possible for me. And that was a moment of like, I had to check myself and get honest. Do you really not want this? Or are you having a hard time with it and you feel like it's not possible for you? And that's what you're saying to pacify yourself. And those are real conversations that I have with myself to this day. So, like I said, I have not figured everything out. That's a pretty big area of life to not have figured out. And I'm still just kind of going through it and taking it all one day at a time. But this journey never ends. Our journey to expanding our mindset never ends because you can have a really great mindset in one area of your life and have your mindset need a bit of work in another area of your life. And so I'm a prime example of that. Like my mindset when it comes to work and friendships and money and opportunity is great. And my mindset when it comes to romance and dating and partnership is not so great. And so those are things that I'm currently navigating and figuring out, okay, for everything I figured out on this side, how can I apply a little bit more of that on this side and be a little bit more open? And that's just kind of where my mindset journey has taken me up until this point. So, my hope in sharing that was to just give you a little bit more insight into how I've applied some of the things that we've talked about on the podcast. And I bet that there are probably elements of my story that you could relate to or maybe see yourself in, and to know that you can get through it and that you can change and that you can evolve the same way your circumstances change and evolve. And so I just wanted to share that because I feel like a lot of us go through the same stuff and we think that we're the only ones who experience certain things or have certain thoughts or have certain challenges. But especially in having this podcast and with all the interviews I've conducted and people I've talked to and talking to so many of you when you DM me or email me after listening to an episode, is that we're never the only ones to go through something. If you think you are the only one who experienced XYZ, you are not. You might be the only person experiencing it in your body right now or in maybe a very specific circumstance, but I guarantee you there is someone else out there who is struggling with the same thing you are struggling with, or who has struggled with it and who has made it out on the other side. So anytime that you feel like it's just you or it's just a problem you have, please remember that it's not. You are a human living the human experience. Life be lifing, as we say all the time. And it's not just you. It's not just things out to get you. These are often really normal experiences that we all have. And I think the more that we can all continue to share our stories, the more we can realize that none of us is really alone in the things that we're feeling. So that was my goal in sharing all of my business up until this point with how I'm doing from a mindset standpoint. So, next, I want to get into a little bit of a life update because I can't remember the last time I did a life update on the podcast. It's been a really long time, but life has been changing a lot, and I want to fill y'all in on what's up. So, a lot of what I shared in this episode earlier was also just to provide a little bit of context about my background and what has gone into some of the decisions that I'm making currently. I talked a lot about my 20s and just how fearful and stifled I felt in a lot of ways, and how there were so many things on my heart that I really wanted to do that I didn't do during that time, and how I refuse to believe that our 20s are the only time that we can experience a lot of those things, because they're not. They're really not. We can pivot, we can change, we can move, we can shift directions at any time. And so, with that, I am making some kind of life changes. I'm going to be on the move a little bit. And for the next few months specifically, um, I'm really planning to have all of the experiences that my younger self really wanted to have. And I feel particularly called to do this because, I am in my 30s, I am single, I am child free. And in a lot of ways, society paints all of those things as being bad. If you're not in your 20s, you are past your prime. If you haven't found a partner by a certain point, then you're never going to find one, or you're going to have to set the bar so low to get one. You better have as many babies as soon as possible, because if you don't, then you can't. And then this, and then that. And then who's going to take care of you when you're old? And your life has no meaning. And all of these things, all of this messaging that can sometimes be really loud in our heads. And I still struggle with those things too, because I'm like, ooh, are they right? Is that what's going to happen? Like, I don't know. Should I? I don't know. Maybe. But I do think that a lot of beauty about being in that space, at least for me, being a single child free woman in my 30s who, like I said, I'm not balling, but I've reached a point of financial stability that I did not have when I was younger, is the freedom that comes with that. And while I could be sad about what I don't have, or who I'm not with yet, or what I haven't had yet, I also recognize that there's so much beauty in the amount of freedom that I have, and that the level of freedom that I currently have is actually kind of unusual for women, but especially for Black women. I'm just kind of out here vibing, free as a bird, with a little bit of means. And that's something that I'm incredibly grateful for. And for a while, I definitely was in my feelings about what I don't have. And I had to come back to reality and be like, wait, but what you do have is freedom and flexibility and the ability to be creative. And that's actually exactly what your brain wanted when it got to that expanded place. So, what can we do with that? How can we lean into that? How can we lean into that freedom? And who can you be when you're just being genuinely who you want? And even if I had a baby tomorrow, I'd be like, wait, no, I'm not ready. There's more stuff I want to do. So, I'm going to do that stuff now while I don't have to worry about that. So that in the future, when those things do come to fruition, I won't feel like I'm sacrificing not sacrificing, because it is a sacrifice, but I won't feel like I'm missing out on anything, or like I didn't get to live for me. I'm using this time to actually do that. So, what does that look like? Um, I'm going to be nomading for a little while. All of that stuff that I wanted to do when I was younger that I didn't get to do, I'm going to go for it. So, I didn't get to study abroad when I was younger. Okay, well, I got a passport and, a laptop now. So I can do my grown up version of that now. I didn't get to live in some of the big cities that I really wanted to do seasons in when I was younger. Well, I can do short seasons in that now. When I was younger, I really wanted to work in media, and I was stuck in aerospace finance, and it was not my cup of tea, but I have this podcast now, and I can use it to really turn into other opportunities working in media just like I wanted to. So I'm really leaning into the beauty that is flexibility and that is freedom for this next season. So I'm going to spend the next 6 months or so traveling and trying different places and trying different things and really enjoying this time and this space and this season with myself, having the experiences that I always wanted to have now that I'm no longer too afraid to go for it. So we'll see how that goes. And naturally, I mean, I'm going to be documenting the whole process and sharing every step of the way as I learn and where I go and what I do. And I'm really, really excited to share that with you, especially as someone in my 30s, because I think we see a lot of that from people in their 20s. And we tend to think, okay, if your 20s are over, it's too late to have the experiences you want to have. But I think if we're still breathing, it's never too late to have the experiences you want to have. Yes, as you get older, if you have more responsibility or you have more people relying on you, it could be a little bit more complicated, but it's never impossible. Like that's been the number one thing that I've learned in my mindset journey is that nothing is impossible. And with a little bit of creativity, a little bit of elbow grease, a little bit of willingness to maybe be nonlinear in some ways, we can make and have and do and feel and experience anything. So I'm going to hit the road and I'm going to be traveling around and it's going to be, I think, fun. I'm looking forward to it. And it's also going to be really hard. I mean, on this show, I talk a lot about habits and routine. Like I said, I've compared myself to Squidward when he moved to Squidville, where I do the same things every day. I love me a routine, love a good Sunday reset, and being in new environments all the time where I'm not going to have that stability and that consistency is a little bit scary. But I also think that it's going to be really helpful in helping me be who I want to be and having those experiences that my soul has been wanting me to have for a really long time. So I'm excited to embark on this and I'm excited to share those things with you. So make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast. Make sure that you're following along on social. I'm at Balance Less on Instagram and TikTok, where I'll be sharing everything and we'll see how this goes. I mean, there's a lot of unknowns about this next season that I'm walking into and I'm excited. I'm nervous, but I think it's going to be really dope. And I'm excited to really lean into that feeling of freedom. And if there are some of you who are listening who are maybe in a similar spot, if you're my age or older and there are certain societal benchmarks that you haven't hit yet, I really encourage you to lean into the freedom and the flexibility you have to make the most out of that time. So what does this mean for Balanced Black Girl? Balanced Black Girl is going to continue. We're going to continue doing it. I'm going to do it on the road and I am going to shift some of our conversations a little bit. I am just wanting to lighten things up a little bit and have them be a little bit more fun and to lean into this theme of what does it mean to live on your own terms? What does it mean, especially for Black women, to have this sense of freedom and not be limited by what other people perceive us as or what other people think we should do or should have or who they think we should date or who they think we should be or what role they think we should play. What if we choose to purely do what it is we want to do? And what does that look like? And that's really the next theme in my life and is going to be a really big theme moving forward on the podcast. And I think that those conversations can be just as healing as the conversations that we have about trauma and therapy and journaling and all of those things that we know that we've talked about. I'm ready for the podcast to be a space where maybe we lighten things up a little bit and maybe we start approaching these conversations in a little bit of a different way. So I'm really looking forward to bringing you more of those types of conversations. Basically, the theme is healthy, happy, thriving. And next month in June, our theme on the podcast is going to be Black women doing cool shit. So I'm inviting guests on all month long that I think are just really cool, who I love to follow, who inspire me, who have all different types of interests and lifestyles and lived experiences, who are just doing the thing and making leaps and moving through fear. And it's going to be fun. It's going to be conversational. It's going to be something cute for the summertime. And I'm really, really excited to bring these conversations to you. So my hope in sharing that and sharing everything that I've shared today and in the upcoming series on the podcast is that I just really inspire you to embrace your journey, embrace what it is that you've learned, embrace those things that you are being called to do and to lean into them and to let yourself have them. Like if there is something that you want, let yourself have it. I think, okay, if I'm not mistaken, was that not in Halloween Town? Do y'all remember Halloween Town when Grandma Cromwell was teaching Marnie magic and she said that the key to magic was to want something and let yourself have it? That's what I want for all of us. I want us to want things and to let ourselves have it. And I think that that's a good way to summarize what we're moving through in this next season. So if you're like me and you've had these layers that are keeping you small, that you've been feeling a little bit suffocated by, friend, I invite you to start shedding and releasing them and to let the wants underneath come and fly and be free. That is all I have for you for today. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. Couple of housekeeping things. I gotta ask you to do a couple of things. One, if you are not subscribed to the show, whether that's on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube, we now have full YouTube episodes. Please go to your platform of choice and give us a subscribe so that you don't miss any new episodes, especially for some of our fun series that I have coming up for you this summer, where you can get fresh new content every Tuesday. Also, if you have not yet left us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, if you want to throw a little 5 stars my way, I would love to see it. If you didn't like it, that's okay. I don't need to know, so maybe not share those. I'm kidding. You can share whatever you want, but we do love the 5 stars. They do help us a lot. And make sure you're following along on socials. So the handle for the show is at Balance Black Girl Podcast on Instagram. You can follow me on Instagram and on TikTok at Balance Less. That's where I'll be sharing more about my travels and what I'm getting into in this next season. So make sure that you keep up with me there. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next week.